Yeah. Well, to be honest, it's funny. It was a tweet. I put a tweet out, something about tires, and somebody replied to me saying, you know, this is way too complicated. There's no way kids try and explain that to kids. And I actually replied to that guy and I said, well, actually, my son is 5 and he understands it. So, you know, but it made me think that, my children are lucky they have a father who's involved in the sport. They watch the races with me. I have time to explain things to them and the knowledge, I guess, from the inside. But there's a lot of kids out there who are fans of the sport who maybe don't have that, who don't have the benefit, right? So I thought maybe, it'll be good for me to do something to try and just get the next generation a bit more excited about the sport, educate them, tell them, because we have a wonderful sport with a very rich history, but it's also a complicated sport. It's a complex sport, probably the most complicated sport on the planet. It's not just a bat ball game. There's so
Right.
many layers to this sport. So for me, I thought it was important to go out there. And then when you look around, there is no other book for children about Formula One. On the whole
Yeah.
planet, there's a few picture books and some illustrative books, but there's no book that really um, speaks to the kids and tries to break it down. So yeah, I thought it was an interesting project to do, and fortunately, the publishers had the same idea. It's certainly the language I've used and the tone I've used is very much designed for kids. So um, it's really designed for kids from sort of 9 to 15. But
Right.
I'm sure there'll be stories in there that even adults don't know, because let's be honest, there's a wave of interest in Formula One around the world, including in India, that
Right.
has come since the Netflix show. There's a lot of fans who have come to the sport in the last 4 or 5 years for whom
Right.
F1 started with Lando Norris or Max Verstappen, and
Right. Right.
so yeah, I hope that they'll also pick up a few things. I think that the unforgettable one has got to be that it's in the book is being well, two things. One is being a Formula One driver from India, right? I think we are 1.3 billion people and two Formula One drivers. It's a pretty
Yeah.
exclusive club. I think Naren and I should make some gold card memberships for ourselves.
Mhm.
um, so I think just trying to maybe highlight that journey to people. The fact that I came from a country where we had no go karting at that time. I never did a go kart race in my life. It was a country which there was no history. It's like today if you hear people from um, Peru or Mexico want to play in the Cricket World Cup. That's what we were trying to
Right.
do. um, so I think maybe just explaining that journey to people who maybe are not aware of just how difficult it was and how far we came has got to be, I think, an important thing. But from an F1 perspective, I think I remember the story about the Braun GP team. When I had a lot of friends who worked at that Honda team when it pulled out at the end of 2008 and became Braun GP. And the fact that they came and won that championship in 2009. I was racing in GP2, which was a support series. So we were racing, Formula 2 basically. So we were racing on the same weekends as F1 on the same tracks. And I was also commentating for Star Sports in India on F1. And I remember watching that season unfold, and it was just amazing. And it's never happened before, may never happen again. A team that arrives in F1 for one season and becomes world champions, both drivers
Right.
and constructors. It's an incredible story. And so, yeah, I've included that story in the book. Well, you're right. Right. If I think back, 2010, 11 was such a buzz. We had two drivers from India in Formula One across that season. We had the Indian GP. We had Force India had arrived on the grid. There was so much interest in the sport. I remember 2011, the Sunday morning of the Indian GP. and there was 7 pages of coverage in the Times of India,
Yeah.
6 pages in Hindustan Times in Delhi about Formula One. And I thought, this is crazy. I remember having to beg the editors to write one article about us to give us some coverage. Just 3-4 years before that. So, um, but since then, the interest has gone down. Absolutely. If you look at the last decade, the IPL has taken cricket to a level that is stratospheric. But ultimately, I think it comes down to heroes. When a Saina Nehwal is doing well or a Sania Mirza is doing well, um, automatically the country gets excited and the media gets excited about it. So I think that's what we're missing right now is the next generation. We've had Jehan Daruvala doing F2. We've had Kush Maini doing F2, Arjun Maini. But ultimately, we need one of them to make it back into F1, I think, to make a big difference. So we'll see. Kush is doing F2 again. He will be testing with Alpine in F1. He's a very good talent. He's a lovely kid. I know him very well. I speak to him very often. And I wish him the best because he's the next in line. F1 is in a very healthy position in terms of driving talent today. If you look at it, there's such a high depth of talent. This year we have 6 rookies, full season rookies coming in who are all very, very strong competitors. But then you also have Alonso, Hamilton, Verstappen, the world champions who are still performing at a very high level. I think the difference between those world champions is that you can rely on them every single week to deliver. They are what I call the A plus stars. I think Leclerc is now getting into that group where he doesn't really have any bad days. I think that is it. I think if you look at the 24 race season, your A plus stars will deliver for you 24 to 24.
Right. The consistency.
The A stars are the ones who will deliver 20, but they'll have 3 or 4 weekends where they won't quite be there. And then you've got your sort of B plus who will deliver 16, 17 weekends of the time. So I think that's what sets them apart, that consistency that those A plus stars they will deliver. But we haven't, you look at Oscar Piastri, Lando Norris, George Russell, Carlos Sainz, there's so many fantastic drivers on the grid who can have another 10, 15 years in F1, So yeah, the sport is in a very healthy way right now. Well, he didn't dominate last year for most of the year. He dominated the first 6 weekends, and then after that, it was a real struggle for him to win anything. So I thought, the end, the last 2/3 of last season, was fantastic. We arrived on Saturday, didn't know who would be on pole position. Woke up on Sunday, went to the track, had no idea who would win the race, and that's what we want as neutral fans. And I expect this year to be more of the same. Today is the first, as we're speaking, is the first day of testing. It's the first time we see all the cars in public on track. And it's impossible to predict. And I think that's great. I think the 3 big storylines for me are Lewis Hamilton at Ferrari. Everyone's excited to see what he can do at Ferrari. Second is, of course, can Lando Norris win his first championship? He was very strong last year. He was winning races, dominant fashion at the last race in Abu Dhabi. So can he carry on where he left off? And third is, can Red Bull recover? Because they started the season strongly, but then they went downhill a bit. So that's the 3 things that I'm most looking forward to this year. Yeah. So Arvid is a very, very talented driver. He's racing F2 this year, of course, and I'm very excited to see what he can do. He's got a great pedigree in karting and junior Formula before this. I think he's a very exciting talent to come through. He's backed by Red Bull. They have a lot of faith in him. They've already put him in the F1 car to do some testing and practice. So, clearly they believe in him. So I'm excited to see what happens when he comes to F1. But of the ones who are already in F1, um, I think Oscar Piastri is the one I'm excited to see how he develops. We saw him win 2 races last year, but he's an amazing talent. So I'm excited to see how he can develop from here. He's now done 2 seasons. He's quite established, and I think this is a big year for him. Yeah, it was challenging. I've been writing columns for magazines and online publications now for 25 years. But that's writing for adults. Writing for kids is a different challenge. So I think the terminology I use is you need to simplify things, but not dumb it down, because kids are smart. The kids are much smarter than we expect. Kids are, this next generation, they're exposed to so much more. They have a much higher level of understanding than maybe we expect. So for me, it was about simplifying the language, but not dumbing things down, and still putting in the details that are important. I think knowledge is key. You need to understand if you want to be in the sport, if you want to work in the sport as a driver or an engineer or mechanic or anything. Educate yourself about the sport. Understand how it works. Understand what the good teams and the bad teams are. If you're a driver, keep your feet on the ground. Just because you win one race, it doesn't mean you're going to be world champion. It's very important to keep level-headed. It's a tough
Right.
sport. Any sport is tough, whether you're an Olympic athlete or cricket or whatever. A career in sport is very tough, and it's very important to stay focused and keep level-headed at it. Not get lost in the showbiz.